As the sun set over a small town in Millfield, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The streets were empty, the houses dark and silent, and the air was thick with a sense of foreboding. I had just moved here a week ago, and I already regretted my decision to buy a house in this quiet, secluded corner of the world. It's very odd indeed. But as the darkness deepened, my fears began to escalate. I could hear strange noises coming from outside, shuffling, scratching sounds that seemed to be getting closer and closer. I tried to shake it off as my imagination playing tricks on me, but the unease just persisted. As I lay in bed, trying to calm my nerves, I heard a sudden crash from downstairs. My heart was racing. I leaped out of my bed and grabbed a baseball bat from the closet. I crept downstairs, my senses on absolute high alert. The living room was a mess. Furniture had been overturned, books and papers scattered all over the floor. But what caught my attention was the open window. I knew for a fact that I had closed it and locked it before I went to bed. I felt a chill run down my spine. Was there an intruder in my house? I began to search the house, room by room. The place was silent, apart from the pounding of my heart and the creaking of the wood floors beneath my feet. But just as I was about to breathe a sigh of relief, I heard a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it again. A low, insidious voice coming from the shadows. I raised my bat, ready to defend myself as I slowly made my way towards the sound. It was coming from the kitchen, I think. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see a faint glow coming from within. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open. But what I saw made me freeze in terror. A figure was standing in the corner of the room, surrounded by candles. Its face was obscured by shadows, but I could see its eyes, cold and empty, staring straight at me. I tried to scream, but my throat was dry and my voice caught in my throat. I wanted to run, to flee from this nightmare, but my legs they wouldn't move. The figure took a step forward, and I saw that it was holding something. It was holding a knife, glinting in the candlelight. It just raised its blade and pointed it directly at me. I felt a sudden surge of adrenaline. I swung my bat, hitting the figure squarely in the chest. It stumbled backwards, and I took the opportunity to just turn and run as fast as I can. I fled the house, not looking back until I was several blocks away. My heart was pounding, my breath coming from ragged gasps. I knew I had to call the police, but something held me back. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a random attack. I spent the night in a nearby motel, too terrified to go back to my house. However, the police arrived the next day, but they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing, absolutely nothing to indicate that anyone had been in my house at all that night. But I knew what I had seen. I knew that there was something evil in that place, something that wanted to hurt me. I never went back to the house again. Years later had gone by, and I heard that the house had been torn down and that a new development had been built on the land. But every time I drove by, I could feel a chill run down my spine. I knew that the memory of that terrifying night would haunt me forever. Despite the fact that the house had been demolished, the memories of the fateful night still lingered in my mind. I could never forget the figure standing in my kitchen, its eyes staring at me with icy coldness. Over time, my fear turned into an obsession. I began to research the history of my old house, hoping to find some answers. It took months of digging through archives and speaking to locals before I uncovered the truth. It turned out that the land on which my house had been built on was once the site of a horrific crime. Decades ago, a serial killer had used the area as his hunting ground, preying on innocent victims who had the misfortune of crossing his path. The killer was eventually caught and executed, but the trauma of his actions had left an inedible mark on the land. Locals whispered that his spirit still haunted the area, seeking revenge on anyone who dared trespass on his territory. I shuddered at the thought. Could it be possible that the figure I saw in my kitchen was the ghost of the killer, still seeking to inflict pain and suffering on the living? As the years went by, I found myself drawn back to Millfield, unable to shake off the memories of that fateful night. I visited the site where my house once stood, and every time I could feel the same sense of dread that had overwhelmed me years ago. One day, as I was driving through the area, I saw a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a young woman dressed in a white dress, with long, dark hair cascading down her back. As I drew closer, I realized with a shock that the woman was not alive. Her skin was pale and waxy, her eyes empty and lifeless. I tried to hit the brakes, but it was too late. My car plowed into the figure, and I felt a sickening thud as I made contact with her. But the strange thing is, when I got out of the car to check, there was nobody there. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and I spun around immediately. There, standing before me, was the figure from my kitchen, his eyes burning with an unholy fire. I knew then that I had made a grave mistake. I had come back to this place where I had almost lost my life, and now I was facing the consequences. The figure raised its knife, and I closed my eyes, ready for the worst. But when I opened them again, it was gone. All that was left was the sound of my own ragged breathing and the knowledge that I had narrowly escaped death yet once again. I fled from the area, never looking back, but even as I left Millfield behind, I knew that the memories of the place would haunt me forever, and I knew that the ghost, or the serial killer, whatever you call it, would still roam the area, seeking new victims to torment and terrorize. I never returned to Millfield after that. The memories of the place were far too painful and haunting, and I knew that I could never escape the fear and dread that I felt whenever I thought about it. Years went by, and I tried my best to put the events of that night behind me. I moved to a new city, started a new life, and tried to forget about the ghostly figures and haunted memories that had plagued me for so long. But one day I received a letter in the mail. It was from a man who claimed to have lived in Millfield during the time I did. He wrote that he had been researching the area, trying to uncover the truth about the killer who had haunted the land for so long. According to his research, the killer's ghost had finally found peace. He had moved on from the land where he had committed his crimes and had finally been able to find rest after years of torment and suffering. I read the letter with a sense of relief and closure. The ghost that had haunted me for so long had finally been put to rest, and I could finally move on from the fear and trauma that had plagued me for so long. As I sat in my new home, surrounded by the safety and comfort of my loved ones, I felt a sense of gratitude for the life I had been given. I knew that I would never forget the horrors of that night in Millfield, but I was also grateful for the chance to move on and find peace. As I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, I knew that I would never forget the lessons that I had learned from my encounter with the supernatural. The world is a mysterious and sometimes terrifying place, but it is also full of wonder, beauty, and hope. And with that thought in my mind, I drifted off into a peaceful slumber, ready to face whatever the future might bring next.